In the winter of 1944, a German infantry battalion dug into defensive positions in the Ardennes forest received reports that made their officers think their scouts had lost their minds. American vehicles were appearing in places where vehicles shouldn't be able to go. They were driving up slopes that German commanders had dismissed as impassable. They were fording streams that should have stopped any wheeled vehicle. They were navigating through dense forest where German doctrine said only infantry could operate. Most impossibly, these American vehicles seemed to be everywhere simultaneously, appearing behind German lines, on German flanks, and in German rear areas with a speed and mobility that defied everything German military experience suggested was possible. The vehicle responsible for these seemingly magical appearances was small, boxy, and looked almost comically inadequate compared to German military vehicles. It was the Willys MB, known universally as the Jeep, and to German soldiers who faced it, the Jeep represented something beyond their understanding of mechanical possibility. German prisoners questioned after the Battle of the Bulge consistently mentioned the Jeep with a mixture of respect and disbelief, describing it as a vehicle that could do impossible things and that seemed to give American forces the ability to be everywhere at once. Some German soldiers, exhausted and demoralized by facing an enemy with superior mobility, genuinely began to wonder if American industrial magic had created a vehicle that violated the laws of physics. Welcome to Cipher Tales, where we uncover the hidden stories that changed the course of World War II. Today we reveal how the humble Jeep made German soldiers think America used magic, transforming modern warfare through mobility that seemed impossible to an enemy accustomed to slower, less versatile vehicles. This wasn't just about Americans having a good truck. It was about how a single vehicle design, produced in massive numbers and used with tactical innovation, gave American forces a mobility advantage so overwhelming that it fundamentally altered the balance of power on battlefields across Europe and beyond. The story of the Jeep demonstrates how industrial design excellence, when combined with mass production and tactical flexibility, can create capabilities that enemies cannot match and struggle even to comprehend. The foundation for understanding German soldiers' amazement at the Jeep requires understanding the stark contrast between American and German approaches to military vehicles and battlefield mobility. German military vehicles were generally built to be robust and powerful, but were not designed with the same emphasis on versatility and all-terrain capability that characterized American design. German trucks and transport vehicles performed well on roads, but struggled significantly in off-road conditions. German military doctrine reflected this limitation, with operations planned around road networks and with off-road movement largely reserved for tracked vehicles like tanks. German soldiers were accustomed to a mobility paradigm where wheeled vehicles stayed on roads, while infantry and tracked vehicles handled off-road movement. This doctrinal assumption meant that German defensive planning often focused on controlling roads, while assuming that terrain between roads would limit enemy mobility. The development of the Jeep emerged from American military recognition that modern mechanized warfare required a light reconnaissance and utility vehicle with exceptional off-road capability. In the late 1930s, the United States Army issued requirements for a vehicle that could replace motorcycles and light trucks for reconnaissance, command and control, weapons platform, and general utility purposes. The requirements were demanding. The vehicle needed to be small and light enough to be easily transported, powerful enough to handle difficult terrain, simple enough to be maintained by non-specialists, and versatile enough to serve multiple roles. Multiple manufacturers competed to meet these requirements, with Willys Overland Motors ultimately winning the contract with a design that would become the standardized Jeep. The design was then produced not just by Willys, but also by Ford Motor Company under license, allowing massive production that would ultimately deliver over 600,000 Jeeps to American and Allied forces during the war. The technical features that gave the Jeep its seemingly magical capabilities were the result of careful engineering that prioritized mobility over comfort or conventional automotive elegance. The four-wheel drive system allowed power to be delivered to all wheels, dramatically improving traction on loose surfaces, steep grades, and obstacles that would stop two-wheel drive vehicles. The high ground clearance and short wheelbase meant the Jeep could navigate over rocks, logs, and rough terrain without getting stuck or damaging its undercarriage. The simple but robust suspension could absorb punishment from off-road driving while keeping wheels in contact with the ground for maximum traction. The powerful engine, relative to the vehicle's light weight, gave it surprising acceleration and hill-climbing ability. The manual transmission with very low gearing allowed the Jeep to crawl over obstacles at walking pace or to climb grades that appeared impossibly steep. Every design element prioritized capability over refinement, creating a vehicle that could go anywhere and do anything within the limits of its size and power. The versatility of the Jeep platform that allowed it to serve dozens of different roles was as important as its mobility in creating the perception of magical omnipresence. The basic Jeep could serve as a reconnaissance vehicle, scouting ahead of main forces and providing commanders with real-time intelligence about enemy positions and terrain. It could be a command vehicle, allowing officers to move quickly around the battlefield to personally direct operations. It could mount weapons, including machine guns and light anti-tank weapons, becoming a mobile fire support platform. It could serve as an ambulance, evacuating wounded from frontline positions faster than any other available vehicle. It could tow artillery pieces and supply trailers, acting as a light logistics vehicle. It could lay communication wire by driving along routes while spooling out cable. This versatility meant the Jeeps were everywhere on the battlefield, performing every possible support function and creating the impression that American forces had unlimited numbers of these vehicles. The massive production numbers that put Jeeps in the hands of virtually every American unit amplified their impact beyond what any single vehicle could achieve. Ford and Willys together produced Jeeps at rates exceeding 300 per day at peak production, creating an industrial torrent of vehicles that flowed to American forces in every theater of war. By 1944, American divisions in Europe had hundreds of Jeeps each, compared to German units that often had only a handful of comparable light vehicles if they had any at all. The numerical advantage meant that American forces could use Jeeps for tasks that German forces had to handle with slower, less efficient methods. The abundance of Jeeps allowed American commanders to think about mobility differently, planning operations that assumed rapid movement and quick response rather than being constrained by transportation limitations. The first encounters between German soldiers and American Jeep mobile operations in North Africa and Italy gave Germans their initial exposure to American mobility advantages. In the North African desert, American reconnaissance units using Jeeps could cover vast distances quickly, appearing in German rear areas and gathering intelligence that seemed impossible to obtain. In the mountainous terrain of Italy, Jeeps navigated mountain trails and crossed streams the German vehicles couldn't handle, allowing Americans to outflank German positions or to supply forces in supposedly inaccessible locations. German after-action reports from these campaigns began noting American mobility advantages and the proliferation of small, capable vehicles that seemed to be everywhere. However, the full impact of the Jeep wouldn't become apparent to German forces until the campaign in Northwest Europe following the Normandy invasion. The use of Jeeps during the breakout from Normandy and the rapid advance across France in summer 1944 demonstrated American mobility at its most devastating. American mechanized units moving at speeds that German forces couldn't match, advancing 50 or 60 miles in a day through territory that Germans had assumed would slow American progress. Jeep-mounted reconnaissance elements raced ahead of main columns, identifying German positions and finding routes around obstacles before German forces could organize effective defenses.
American commanders rode in jeeps at the front of their advancing columns, making real-time decisions and adapting to situations as they developed, rather than commanding from rear positions through delayed communications. The speed and flexibility of the American advance, enabled significantly by jeep mobility, left German forces reeling and unable to establish coherent defensive lines. German soldiers who managed to escape encirclements reported seeing American jeeps seemingly everywhere, cutting roads, attacking supply columns, and coordinating attacks with a speed that seemed impossible.
The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 and January 1945 provided the most dramatic demonstration of jeep capabilities under the worst possible conditions and created the most vivid German impressions of American vehicle magic. The German offensive was launched in winter conditions, with snow, ice, and mud that German planners assumed would limit vehicle mobility for both sides. German forces relied heavily on captured American fuel to sustain their advance because their own logistics couldn't keep pace through the difficult terrain. Meanwhile, American forces used jeeps to rush reinforcements to threatened sectors, to maintain communications between surrounded units, to evacuate wounded under fire, and to coordinate counterattacks. The jeep's four-wheel drive and ground clearance allowed it to operate in conditions where German vehicles often became stuck. American relief columns moving to relieve Bastogne included hundreds of jeeps carrying troops, supplies, and ammunition through snow and mud that would have stopped conventional vehicles. German soldiers watching American mobility in these conditions described it in their journals and letters as unnatural, suggesting that American vehicles must have some special technology or that American soldiers had supernatural ability to keep vehicles moving in impossible conditions. The psychological impact of facing an enemy with superior mobility extended beyond simple tactical disadvantage to create a sense of helplessness among German soldiers who felt they could never rest because Americans could appear anywhere at any time. German defensive positions that should have been secure because they were off main roads or in difficult terrain found themselves under attack by jeep-mounted forces that had navigated supposedly impassable routes. German supply lines that should have been safe in rear areas found themselves cut by American jeep patrols that had penetrated deep behind German lines. German commanders, planning movements, found their columns ambushed by American forces that had used jeeps to quickly position themselves along German routes of advance. The cumulative effect was a sense that Americans could see everywhere and be everywhere, that no position was truly secure, and that German forces were always at a disadvantage in terms of speed and flexibility. This psychological pressure added to the physical pressure of American firepower and numbers, contributing to the erosion of German morale and combat effectiveness. The specific accounts from German prisoners of war describing their experiences with American jeep mobility provide direct testimony to the impression the vehicle made. One German officer, captured in the Ardennes, described being surrounded by American forces that had used jeeps to move infantry through forest terrain in hours, outflanking his position before he could receive orders to withdraw. He stated that his training had taught him that such rapid infantry movement through difficult terrain was impossible, and that he initially refused to believe his scouts' reports until American forces actually appeared. Another German soldier described watching from concealment as a seemingly endless column of American jeeps passed, each one carrying troops, weapons, or supplies, moving at speeds he associated with vehicles on highways, despite being on a rough forest trail. He wrote that he counted over 100 jeeps in an hour, and that he became convinced that Americans must have thousands of these vehicles and unlimited fuel to operate them so freely. A third prisoner, a logistics officer, described the contrast between American and German logistics mobility, noting that Americans could move supplies forward using jeeps in conditions where German trucks became stuck, giving Americans the ability to sustain operations that German forces had to halt due to supply difficulties. The adaptations and modifications that American soldiers made to Jeeps in the field demonstrated the vehicle's versatility and created even more capabilities that added to German confusion about what Jeeps could do. Soldiers mounted additional machine guns, creating heavily armed patrol vehicles. They added armor plating to protect against small arms fire, turning Jeeps into light armored vehicles. They modified Jeeps to carry stretchers more effectively, improving casualty evacuation capabilities. They attached specialized equipment for laying communication wire, cutting barbed wire, or carrying engineering tools. Every modification expanded the Jeep's utility and created new tactical possibilities. German soldiers encountering these field-modified Jeeps often didn't understand what they were seeing, adding to the impression that Americans had multiple types of specialized vehicles, when actually they had one basic vehicle adapted for many purposes.
The use of Jeeps by special operations forces, including reconnaissance units and ranger battalions, created some of the most dramatic and seemingly impossible feats that contributed to German belief in American vehicle magic. Deep penetration missions, where small teams used Jeeps to infiltrate dozens of miles behind German lines, demonstrated capabilities that German doctrine said shouldn't exist for wheeled vehicles. High-speed raids, where Jeep-mounted forces struck German positions and withdrew before German forces could respond, showed tactical flexibility that German units couldn't match. Reconnaissance sweeps, where single Jeeps covered more ground in a day than German units could cover in a week, provided intelligence advantages that German commanders found difficult to counter. These special operations applications pushed Jeep capabilities to their limits and created spectacular examples that fed German perceptions of American mobility advantages. The comparative analysis of Jeep performance versus German equivalent vehicles explains why Germans were so impressed and why they couldn't replicate American mobility advantages. Germany had produced the Kübelwagen, a light military vehicle based on the Volkswagen design, which was technically sophisticated and well-engineered, but fundamentally different from the Jeep in capabilities. The Kübelwagen was rear-wheel drive rather than four-wheel drive, limiting its off-road capability significantly compared to the Jeep. It had less power and less ground clearance, restricting its ability to handle obstacles and steep grades. It was designed more for on-road efficiency than for extreme off-road mobility. While the Kübelwagen was a good vehicle within its design parameters and served German forces adequately in many roles, it simply couldn't do what a Jeep could do in terms of all-terrain mobility. German soldiers who had experience with both vehicles were very clear about the differences, consistently rating the Jeep as superior for any operation requiring off-road capability. The influence of Jeep design on German vehicle development during the war showed that German military leadership recognized American mobility advantages but couldn't effectively counter them. German designers created proposals for vehicles that would match Jeep capabilities, but resource constraints and production priorities meant that few of these designs reached production before war's end. The Volkswagen Type 87, a four-wheel drive variant of the Kübelwagen, was produced in limited numbers but came too late and in too few quantities to significantly impact German mobility. German forces increasingly relied on captured American vehicles, including Jeeps, when they could acquire them, with captured Jeeps being highly prized and reserved for important missions. The fact that Germans preferred captured American Jeeps over their own vehicles when given the choice demonstrated their recognition of the Jeep's superiority. The logistical and industrial implications of Jeep production demonstrated American manufacturing capabilities in ways that German military planners found deeply concerning. The fact that America could produce hundreds of thousands of sophisticated, reliable vehicles while simultaneously producing tanks, aircraft, ships, and every other weapon of war suggested industrial capacity that Germany could not match. German industry struggled to produce adequate numbers of trucks and transport vehicles even as a sole priority in vehicle production, while American industry produced Jeeps almost as an afterthought while also producing everything else in abundance. The Jeep became a symbol of American industrial might and a reminder to German forces that they were fighting an enemy with resources and industrial capabilities that far exceeded Germany's. Every Jeep a German soldier encountered was a rolling advertisement for American economic and industrial superiority.
The post-war influence of the Jeep on military vehicle design worldwide demonstrated that its capabilities weren't magical, but rather represented a new standard for military mobility that all nations would have to meet. After the war, every major military sought to develop or acquire similar vehicles, recognizing that modern warfare required the kind of tactical mobility the Jeep provided. The Soviet Union reverse-engineered American Jeeps to create the GAZ-67, copying design features while adapting them to Soviet production capabilities. Britain, France, and other nations developed their own light military vehicles inspired by Jeep capabilities. The civilian Jeep market exploded as returning soldiers who had experienced Jeep mobility wanted similar vehicles for civilian use, leading to the development of the post-war civilian Jeep and eventually to the entire sport utility vehicle market. The Jeep's influence extended far beyond military applications to shape the entire automotive industry's understanding of what vehicles could do. The technological evolution that made the Jeep possible included advances in metallurgy, engine design, transmission engineering, and manufacturing techniques that represented cutting-edge automotive technology of the early 1940s. The Jeep's engine was compact but powerful, using advanced carburetor design and efficient combustion to extract maximum power from a small displacement. The four-wheel drive system required sophisticated gear design and robust transfer case engineering to reliably deliver power to all wheels under extreme conditions. The suspension components had to be strong enough to handle military abuse while still providing adequate ride quality. The manufacturing processes had to allow mass production while maintaining the precision required for reliable mechanical systems. Every technical aspect of the Jeep represented solved engineering problems and successful manufacturing execution, demonstrating American capabilities in practical automotive engineering. The maintenance and reliability advantages of the Jeep that allowed American forces to keep vehicles operational under field conditions added to German perception of American advantages. The Jeep was designed from the start for ease of maintenance, with components that could be accessed and replaced quickly by mechanics with basic tools. The simplicity of the design meant that there were fewer things to break and that repairs could be made quickly when problems did occur. The standardization meant that spare parts were widely available and interchangeable between vehicles. American forces established maintenance and repair systems that kept Jeeps running even under combat conditions, with battlefield maintenance often performed in hours rather than the days that complex German vehicles might require. German logistics and maintenance systems, already strained by the complexity and variety of German equipment, couldn't match American ability to keep vehicles operational. The result was that American Jeep-equipped units maintained high operational readiness, while German units often had significant percentages of vehicles unavailable due to maintenance issues. The cultural impact of the Jeep on American military identity and on global perceptions of American forces extended the vehicle's influence beyond its immediate military utility. The Jeep became an icon of American military power and mobility, featured in countless photographs, newsreels, and propaganda materials. Soldiers' letters home frequently mention Jeeps, describing their capabilities with pride. Post-war memoirs and histories consistently highlighted the Jeep's role in American victory. The vehicle became part of American cultural mythology about World War II, representing American ingenuity, industrial power, and the can-do attitude that Americans believed characterized their military. For other nations, including German enemies and Allied partners, the Jeep became a symbol of American military excellence and a standard against which to measure their own military capabilities. The specific missions where Jeeps made decisive differences in operational outcomes demonstrate the vehicle's concrete impact beyond symbolic or psychological effects. During the Race to the Rhine, Jeep-mounted reconnaissance elements identified intact bridges before German forces could demolish them, allowing American armor to cross and establish bridgeheads. During urban combat in German cities, Jeep's maneuverability allowed rapid movement through rubble-filled streets and quick repositioning of weapons and troops to respond to threats. During the final advance into Germany,
Jeeps carried liaison officers who coordinated between American units and advancing Soviet forces, preventing friendly fire incidents and facilitating the link-up that completed Germany's encirclement. In each case, the Jeep's speed, reliability, and versatility allowed missions to succeed that would have been much more difficult or impossible with less capable vehicles.
The legacy of German soldiers' perception of the Jeep as somehow magical or impossible has lived on in post-war German military culture and in comparative military analysis. German veterans writing memoirs after the war consistently mentioned the Jeep as one of the American weapons that impressed them most, often describing it with more respect than they gave to American tanks or artillery. German military analysts studying American success have identified American mobility advantages, symbolized by the Jeep, as one of the factors that allowed Americans to win the war despite what Germans considered tactical weaknesses in other areas. The recognition that Americans had outthought Germans in some fundamental aspects of military design, creating tools like the Jeep that gave them decisive advantages, has been humbling for German military culture that had prided itself on tactical and technological superiority. This is the story of the Jeep that made German soldiers think America used magic, a vehicle so capable and so ubiquitous that it seemed to violate the laws of physics and logistics that German military experience said should apply to wheeled vehicles. The German soldiers who watched in disbelief as Jeeps navigated terrain they had dismissed as impassable, who faced American attacks that appeared with impossible speed from unexpected directions, who felt surrounded by an enemy that seemed to be everywhere at once. The American industrial and engineering achievement that created not just a good vehicle, but a vehicle so superior to anything comparable that enemies struggled to comprehend what they were facing. The tactical revolution in mobility that allowed American forces to operate with speed and flexibility that German forces, still largely dependent on horse-drawn transport despite their technological reputation, could never match. The Jeep proved that sometimes the most important weapons aren't the biggest or most powerful, but rather the ones that allow your forces to be in the right place at the right time, again and again, until the enemy breaks, not from overwhelming force, but from exhaustion at facing opponents who can always move faster and be everywhere simultaneously. But here's what nobody tells you about the Jeep's magic. There was one modification American soldiers made in the field that turned Jeeps into tank killers. German panzer crews started fearing certain Jeeps more than they feared American tanks. What was this weapon, and why did the U.S. Army try to ban it? And there's an even stranger story. One German unit captured dozens of American Jeeps and tried to use them against American forces. What happened next became one of the war's most bizarre tactical disasters and taught both sides a lesson about technology that military planners still study today. Want to know what weapon made Jeeps deadly to tanks? Curious about the German unit that captured Jeeps and paid a terrible price? Subscribe to Cipher Tales because our next video reveals the one German vehicle that actually did match the Jeep's capabilities, but Hitler himself killed the program. The reason why will make you question everything you think you know about German military decisions. Hit that like button if you're amazed by how a simple vehicle changed modern warfare. Drop a comment. What other World War II vehicle or weapon mysteries should we investigate? The tank that terrified both sides, the aircraft that nobody wanted but won the war, the ship that shouldn't have worked but became legendary. Share this with anyone who loves military history, engineering stories, or the hidden advantages that determined who won World War II. Because sometimes the most important innovations are the ones that seem simple on the surface, but change everything underneath. Until next time, remember, magic is just technology that your enemy doesn't understand yet. And sometimes the best weapon is the one that lets you be everywhere your enemy isn't. This is Cipher Tales, where simple solutions beat complex problems.
where mobility matters more than armor, and where the stories that seem impossible are the ones that actually happened.